We're going to get underway shortly. Just hang in there. We're just going to wait for some people to join us. Okay, why don't we get underway? Good afternoon, I'm George Brown. I'm Vice President of Business Development at RTDNA Canada, and on behalf of our organization, I would like to welcome you all to our second in a series of webinars where we seek to get to the heart of issues and meet the challenges of journalism today. It would be an understatement to say that we are in the midst of unprecedented change facing our industry and more personally, our careers. Today's topic, just a sec here, screen's going a little crazy. Today's topic wins the award for the longest webinar title, Life After Mainstream Journalism, Opportunities, Innovation, Toolkit, and Reinvention in an Unpredictable and Shifting Industry. Thank you to all of our panelists who offered to share their valuable insights. And I have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed moderator for today's discussion. Vanmala Subramaniam is a business journalist with over a decade of reporting across many Canadian news organizations. She is currently the capital markets reporter at the Globe and Mail. Previous to that, she worked at the Financial Post, covering the cannabis sector, was editor of Vice Canada's Money Vertical, a producer at CNN, and an associate producer for CBC, working on current affairs for such programs as The Fifth Estate. Over to you, Vanmala.
Thanks so much, George. Welcome, everyone. I have been really looking forward to this discussion. I think all four of us on the panel at some point intersected at the CBC. So that's going to be interesting through the next hour. But, you know, I think a good place to start this out is maybe, you know, from all of you, just before we drill into the details of what your post-journalism career was like, perhaps you can each talk about at what point it was in your journalism career did you feel, you know, this is not working. I think I might want to do something else. This is my point where I might want to leave. Dave, maybe we'll start with you.
It's interesting that you say post-journalism career, because I hope I'm not upsetting the apple cart here, but I'm still doing journalism. But I'm doing it in a way that is much more personally satisfying for me. So I think that the issue for me is working at the CBC is that I felt that, and this happens when you work for large news organizations, that you get put in a box and they see you in a certain way. And in order to break out, you have to do something, you know, you have to maybe yell and scream, or you have to do something extraordinary. I felt that I had. In that I had taken part in a lot of investigations that were data driven. I felt I had proven myself over again, wasn't willing to rest on my laurels. And yet it was still hard to say, okay, well, I should, you know, for the powers that be to say, yeah, you can go ahead and do something else. And I think that I realized that probably a few years before I actually decided to leave. And I knew that for me, doing something else, and it was more like a post-CBC career than a post-journalism career, I decided that I had to start laying the groundwork for eventually shifting and essentially working for myself, which meant working with other people and then doing my own thing. So I think that, you know, it's something that you think about like throughout the course of your career. Like, where am I going? What skill sets am I developing? What can I do with this stuff? Can I do what I need to do within this organization? And then probably one of the most important considerations is financially, can I pull this off, right? Because if at the end of the day, if you can't pay the bills, you know, I mean, I had still have three children, a mortgage, all that kind of stuff. And those are the realities. So there's a lot to consider, but for me, it wasn't necessarily a post-journalism career. It was a post-CBC career, still being able to do journalism, but in the way that I really wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Jen, what was that point for you where you wanted, I guess you did leave journalism for a time and now you're back in it, but what was that point, just briefly?
In a way, it was actually graduating journalism school. So Alex and I actually have some connection at Concordia University and a background in campus radio. I did my Bachelor of Arts with a specialization in journalism and communications at Concordia University. And I was very involved in campus radio, wrote for the school newspapers, reported for the Concordia television station. And I also got a job working as a campus marketing rep for Sony Music Canada. And this was at a time where the internet was really coming of age. When I started my program in 1994, universities were one of the few places you could actually get an email address. By the time I was graduating in 1997, graphics had just been introduced to the internet. And it's funny even saying that now as we're having this conversation with video and Zoom. So as I was applying to work in TV news, that's what I had dreamed of, becoming a broadcast journalist. I was offered a job at Sony Music Canada full-time, creating online content. And this was a team that was called Consumer Technology. They were being renamed New Media. So it would mean working for music artists like Celine Dion and Our Lady Peace, a full roster of talent. Is that journalism? I don't know, but it was a job and it was pretty close to what I was doing. I was going to be telling stories. It was multimedia. It was fun. It was new. And it was based on one of my passions, which was music. So that's actually where my career started. It started at a record label. I then went on to CTV, Much Music, CBC, worked as a freelancer, left journalism. I'm now back in it, not as a journalist, as an executive director at the Walrus. But for me, it was really early on realizing, you know what, I have journalism skills and I can use them in a variety of ways. And there's no shame in doing that, because obviously when you graduate with a journalism degree, you do have to ask yourself, am I a journalist? Am I a journalist? And I think for all of us, we are in different ways.
That's very interesting, because at least when I was in journalism school, your options appeared to be quite narrow, at least the way, the classroom kind of thought about it. We always looked at mainstream broadcasters as one of the big recruitment, recruiters, and then you had the big newspapers and you had all those internships. But Alex, actually, let me come to you. Can you maybe talk about let's get into this, talk about the reason why you wanted to move on from journalism, although you're still in the landscape of journalism, but what was that reason?
Well, I'd had a wonderful career. I'd spent 15 years at the CBC, investigative journalist. Jen, you'll see the call station from the radio station that we worked at. But even when I was I was station manager at Radio Concordia. Even then, I think I realized that part of me enjoyed running an operation. Part of me really enjoyed leadership. And to what Dave was saying, at the CBC, it's such a monolithic organization that it's very difficult to rise to the top, and you do very much get pigeonholed into what you're doing. And I'd had a great career there, but I think I got frustrated with maybe not being right on top of the star system at the CBC, and recognizing that there were more options for me outside the door. To the financial aspect that Dave raised, and I think for me, it was a matter of, can I afford to stay in journalism? I think I recognized pretty quickly that there was more money to be made in a variety of different ways, and a realization that maybe when I left, that I was going to take on some different projects that I'd have some more control over, that I was more interested in, and that really drove me in the same way as journalism drove me at the time. So it was a combination of things. And I will also say that I was one of the people who was, I'd moved to Quebec to take on a bureau chief role in Quebec City. And because of that, I'd given up a series of union seniority pieces. And so when the bumps came at the CBC into the Harper era, I was one of the people that got bumped out. On the plus side, I got a nice package to be able to leave the CBC. And with that, I was able to spend some time restructuring my life and thinking more about the other opportunities that I'd been thinking about for a long time already. So it was a series of things that came together all at the same time, and allowed me the opportunity to make that jump and to experience the outside world. And as you say, though, even today, in my role as executive director of the Community Radio Fund, we administer the local journalism initiative. And so through our fund, we support more than 60 journalists in news deserts across the country. We provide training and we provide, information support. So much like others, I tried to get out and they kept me, sucked me back in.
Well, I want to get back to that point about job security later on in the conversation, because I think that's a huge thing. And there are only really maybe 2 to 3 remaining mainstream media outlets that can actually provide longevity and, a decent salary in terms of job security. But we'll come back to that. Dave, I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier in terms of feeling like you couldn't develop within the confines of mainstream journalism. I suppose it was the CBC. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit? Did you feel underappreciated? And the reason why I ask is because I want to understand what the push factor is for people leaving the industry.
Yeah, I did. No slight to my colleagues, to the wonderful people I worked with, the people who taught me basically a lot of what I know now, but I just felt that I'd gotten to a point where I could do more. That's the bottom line. I wanted to do more than producing. I wanted to do more investigating. I wanted to use more of the skills that I developed through my teaching at Carleton and the University of King's College, through my data journalism work that I had developed. By the time, I've co-authored 3 journalism textbooks and 2 user guides, one on access to information. I've amassed a lot of information, and I wanted to be able to use that in a different capacity in terms of teaching. And when I was at the CBC, to their credit, I was able to develop a 2-day data journalism workshop that I was able to roll out across the country. Well, I wanted to do more of that. I wanted to work with more of the shows like Marketplace and the Fifth Estate and the National on doing more data-driven stuff. I just wanted to do more. I wanted to break out, and it was clear that we were, and I gather the CBC still is, in cutting mode. They're actually spending less money on a lot of those shows and pumping more money into online. Although I would argue that that's an argument for doing more of what I do. If you're doing online, it's doing the data visualization, the different methods of storytelling, radio and TV and whatnot. It's more of an argument for doing more of what I had to offer. But it was clear that just wasn't going to happen. And I just felt that, even though I was on staff for 26 years, I would repeatedly say that my best work is ahead of me. And I still feel that it is. And so I'm grateful right now. I'm at the National Observer. I'm the deputy managing editor. I get to write, I get to edit, I get to work with and nurture young reporters, all the things that I was doing at the CBC. I've actually increased my teaching load. So I taught last fall at Ryerson. I taught a political journalism course. I picked up extra courses at Carleton and the University of King's College, things that I couldn't do when I was at the CBC. And I've formed a consultancy. So like Alex, I offer data journalism training. And so all of those things I couldn't do when I was at the CBC. So it really is, expanding. But bottom line is that feeling that that they don't really appreciate what you have to offer. And then even if they did, maybe they were not in a position to offer you that.
Jen, I'm curious to pick your brain on this. I find myself thinking, is this something, is this feeling of being underappreciated that, in fact, in my conversations with journalists, that's a big part of what we end up talking about. There is, to some extent, a feeling of being unappreciated in this industry. Is that something that you think is related to the way the industry has just shrunk over time, and how that just so many layoffs, how big tech has kind of disrupted us to a large extent? Just your thoughts on that lack of appreciation.
Prior to big tech, so looking at the early 2000s, working as an on-air host, especially as a Much Music VJ, which was a dream job for so many young people across Canada who grew up watching Much Music. My experience in broadcast journalism is when you're on air, there's this feeling that there is a pile of demo tapes and that everyone wants your job and you're so lucky to have it. And while that's true, I also feel the broadcasters I worked for was lucky to have me on their team, and that I brought a range of skills, and that I was working really hard and I had earned my role in my position. But the work in media, especially in television, my experience, it has always been precarious. So the work that I've done on air as a host or reporter, as a producer, as a cross-platform contributor, it has been year to year. At CBC, I was brought on it as a 6-month contract, then it was month to month, and my position was eliminated. So part of that lack of appreciation is this idea that you're lucky to have one of the few jobs left. And that existed when there were a lot of jobs in the late 90s and early 2000s. And right now, yeah, the jobs in journalism are few and far between. So that's definitely part of it.
Alex, I see you nodding a lot there. Do you want to weigh in on what Jen just said?
Well, I mean, there is this funny sense, and a lot of people that I work with through my consultancy, they say, I don't think I can do anything else but journalism. That's all I've ever been told I'm good at. That's all I know how to do. I just know how to write stories. That's all I'm able to do. And I think that that's a misnomer in a really big way. I think that journalists are hugely appreciated outside of the world of journalism, and I think that there's a huge demand for those skill sets. To pick up on a few points, the world of journalism is changing. We saw Bell cut. I don't think they've ever put a total number on the number of journalists, but they cut entire newsrooms. They're going to still try and do news, but they don't have anybody doing the research on their behalf. The message that sends to the standard and the average journalist is you're just, not that valuable. We can pick it up from somebody else and repurpose it. And I think that's a really difficult position to be in. I mean, places like the Globe and Mail still invest, Torstar still invests, CBC, to a certain degree does still invest. And I guess it depends on the government in power that can change that. But I don't think there are any newsrooms that are 100% safe. And I think that it's a real challenge in this day and age, particularly for people who rely on the income from their job, to really make sure that they're being true to themselves in terms of what their future looks like and where they're most appreciated. The moment I left journalism, I became a chief of staff at a university, and people were regularly saying to me, we really love what you're doing. It's not something that usually happens in the newsroom, and that's a strange environment. But part of the nature of being a journalist is you're doing something you believe in your core. You believe in getting that message out. You believe in making sure that the world is a better place, that it has the information it needs to make informed decisions and that sort of thing. That's one of the huge draws, but it's also one of the things that locks people in.
Mm-hmm. Actually, on that point, Jen. Oops, I'm muted. Jen, on that point, I want to talk a little bit about your specific journey. You went to Harvard and then you came back and you got into politics. And so you went from having to wear this very neutral hat of covering all sides to really being able to be partisan and taking a stance and, showing people what your values really were. So maybe talk to us a little bit about why you chose politics.
Yeah, that was an incredible journey. So while I was at the CBC working on this month-to-month contract, I thought maybe I should go back to school. And I was really interested in a master's of public administration or public policy, because I saw it as an opportunity to build on the work that I was doing in journalism and perhaps see what could come next. Ultimately, why I think anyone becomes a journalist is to change the world, is to shine a spotlight on issues and stories that matter. I did feel working in television that the soundbite was decreasing. So when I was in J school in the 90s, it was about 15 seconds. by 2010, it was at 5 to 4 seconds of sound bites. And funny enough that I would go on to work at Twitter, right? Because I think tweets have also impacted the sound bite. So got into Harvard, incredible program. And I was actually curious as a journalist how I would be received at a school of public policy and government. I was welcome. There were other journalists in the program. A lot of people would reach out and say, hey, can we have lunch? I want to know how to work better with the media. I want to find out what you do. So it was great to be recognized for my work. There were Canadians at the school as well, who I was able to connect with and build relationships with. But I saw an opportunity to do more with public policy and possibly running for office myself. I stayed an extra year at MIT. I co-founded something called Super PAC app, which was a great cross-section of my interest and background in digital and politics and fact checking. So it was like Shazam. Instead of holding your phone up for music, you would hold your phone up for political ads in the 2012 US election. So I come back and there was an opportunity in my community to run for a nomination for the NDP. And I decided to go for it. And it did feel like a coming out, if you will, because journalists are expected to be nonpartisan. Some journalists even go the distance of not voting, which I don't think is necessary, but I understand it's a decision some make. So to actually show up as an NDP member at the leadership convention and see my friends who were covering it was a bit awkward, but I just went over and said, hi, how are you? I'm here. And again, I did get an MPA. I was studying at a school of government, so I don't think it's a complete surprise. But yeah, that was a turning point. And I wasn't sure if I would ever return to work in the media. I have in different roles, but yeah, a lot of journalists do go on to become politicians, but it's definitely a bridge one is aware that they are crossing in that moment.
And it's not the dark side.
That must have taken a lot of guts to go into politics. And Dave, I want to ask you. You made the decision to become a professor and go down the teaching route, and you're still a journalist to a large extent. People tend to always think of post journalism as PR and comms, and those kinds of jobs are very kind of transferable. Maybe could you talk a little bit about how there are actually so many more options out there besides just being in the communications field after being a journalist?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I was just taking notes before this session. I was thinking, okay, let's just whiteboard all of the skill sets that you develop as a journalist. There's writing, there's research, there's dealing with people, there's producing, there's working with data, there's working with teams, there's leading teams, and I can go on and on. Those skill sets really take you beyond I would say the cloistered world of communications, which tends to be the other side of the divide for us, right? We deal with communications people. It means that you can go into different kinds of storytelling. It means that you can maybe work for a nonprofit. It means that you can maybe teach. It means that you can do all kinds of things. So I think that, my lesson my takeaway is that as, journalists, we develop a real diverse skill set. And, this is the message that we have for students as well, that you may not want to work as a journalist, A, because you don't want to, or B, because they're just, the jobs aren't there yet. But look at all the skills that you're developing. Right now I'm teaching an investigative workshop at the University of King's College, and they are learning. I've got team leaders. I've got people working in teams. I've got people working with data and data visualization and research and interviewing skills and all those things. You put all that together, and there's lots of things that you can do. And I think that as long as we keep that in mind, there are many options out there for us, including staying within journalism, but maybe with a startup. For example, hopefully there will be more walruses in the days to come, right? With the technology where it is, and the ability to use technology to, venture into new territories or create new newsletters. There's all kinds of possibilities. So I think that, we have to stop thinking of ourselves, putting ourselves in a box. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we put ourselves in that little box. And I would dare say that, at places like the CBC, they don't help matters when they put you there, right? You have to have enough intestinal fortitude to fight back and say, no, I'm not going to let you define me. I will define myself, right? And that's hard for a 20-something to do.
I will add to that.
Go ahead, Jen.
I realized very early on, after I graduated journalism school, that I had the skill to write myself into and out of any job. So even the ability to tell your story in a cover letter is an incredible skill that most other people don't have coming out of college or university. So I appreciate you listing that skill set, because it will take you far throughout your career.
I just want to remind the audience, everyone tuning in, that you can ask questions whenever you want. And we have a facilitator who will take your questions in maybe the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session. I want to, we're talking about live, options after mainstream media. Alex, could you talk a little bit about how the options have actually widened over time? Now you have things like Substacks. I know of a really good Bloomberg tech journalist who quit Bloomberg and started his own Substack. Eric Newcomer, I think is his name. And his Substack has done really well. So he's essentially running his own business that is that is an app to facilitate it. Maybe talk a little bit about those kinds of options where you can remain a journalist, but also do it your own way.
Well, there's to build on what Dave was saying, there are just so many different ways of applying the skills that you have to the rest of the world. When I left, I became a chief of staff. And I got all sorts of questions. First of all, the question number one was, what exactly does a chief of staff do? And from there, it was, how do you know how to be a chief of staff? And I keep saying, look, at my core, I'm a storyteller. That's what I spent 15 years in journalism learning to do, how to tell a story in a comprehensive manner. I was working at a university. And I remember clearly we had one of our astrophysicist department won a Nobel Prize. And it took 24 hours to get a news release out because there was an argument about whether or not we should have muons as part of that press release. And I kept saying, look, what we're doing is we're telling a story. I know you're being academically sensitive. And over time, we all learned to work together. But at the end of the day, what I was doing was applying the things I learned as a journalist to being a chief of staff. I ended up working for the national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. And now what I do is I have a side project, and I'm going to make one quick plug, legupca.com, for anybody who's interested in getting some assistance in terms of figuring out where you're going. That's what I do on the side, and I help people figure this out. To what Dave was saying, the first thing you do is you sit down and you rewrite that resume, and you rethink about what it is that you do and how you fit into other worlds. So what are they looking for, right? And this is back to your question, where can a journalist go? Just about anywhere. I've seen journalists walk into public service. I've seen journalists take over in terms of a consulting firm that has to do with organizational design and corporate culture. I know journalists that have had huge success. Again, obviously there's communications roles, because everybody has now learned that to be successful in this world, you need to have somebody who knows how to communicate. And communicating clear and effective messages is very challenging. There's research projects, because you become an incredible researcher in a very short period of time that you know how to do. As Jen was saying, you know how to write a clear and concise story. And that's valuable across the board. Every company that's trying to get their message out on a Twitter or on a social media platform or through digital marketing, they all need to be able to tap into somebody who can create those messages and who can do that research and who has the ability to make those contacts. Government relations teams, you have a Rolodex full of people you know. Why wouldn't you be able to go and service somebody in a government relations or public policy facility? So as we've grown, as journalists have left journalism, the world has begun to realize just how valuable that skill set is. And And I think it's really important that journalists take time to consistently reassess what it is they're able to do. Every journalist who shows up on my doorstep walks in with a list of a CV that says, here's the program I worked for, and here's the program I worked for before that, and here's the newspaper I once wrote for. But they don't spend time saying what their skill sets are. And it's a matter of figuring that key question out as you leave the door, or as you prepare to leave the door, as you think about where you want to go. And the other thing that is really important is when I was leaving, I sat down and I've spent a lot of time, and I recognized that I like doing not-for-profit work. Again, it feeds into that need to be able to make the world a better place. And so I just began to think about how the skills that I have feed into companies that do not-for-profit work. And it's been hugely valuable to me, not just for being able to understand where I can land, but also understanding a bit more about who I am.
Muted myself again. But I guess one of the considerations, at least this has been in my discussions with friends and colleagues, is job security, as we talked about a little bit earlier. So you might be frustrated within the confines of mainstream media, but you might stay in it because to a large extent, you still get to do what you want to kind of do. It might not be ideal, and you're getting a steady paycheck, as opposed to leaving and trying to, make it on your own as a freelancer, for instance. Jen, maybe you could comment on how, young people or anyone thinking of leaving the industry could weigh these considerations of job security versus what's out there.
I have a lot of young people who reach out to me specifically because I have a non-linear career path. It involves journalism, but also digital and politics. And I've recently been hired as the executive director of the Walrus because of that diversity of experience. What I usually say to the young people who ask me about my career path and they're thinking about what they want to do is I ask them larger questions about life, which is what do you need? What type of salary are you looking for? Is job security important to you? Because coming out of journalism school for me, I had a roommate who got a job at CBC and has done well there and has that security. That was not going to be a path that I was taking. I grew up with two parents who didn't have the one job at the same place for 30, 40 years. They both worked contract jobs. My mom working class jobs, my dad working in media, later in nonprofit. And so for me, I've always been interested in adventure, in opportunity, in challenges, and I'm not scared of taking risks. But I'm also someone who didn't take on a mortgage until my early 40s. I'm someone who doesn't own a car. I'm someone who prioritizes travel. And even running for office, to do that, you have to have savings and be willing to live like a student for a year. So I think you do have to ask yourself larger questions in regards to what do you want from a career? What type of stability do you want in your life? What is your appetite for risk? I have found, though, friends of mine who have walked away from mainstream or traditional media to do their own thing, overall, have been very happy with that decision and wonder why they haven't done it sooner.
And
I would just add that I think
Go ahead,
that,
Dave.
the days of people aspiring to a long career at the CBC, CTV, the Globe and Mail, etc. I don't know that those days might be behind us. I think that journalists and what I tell my students is that learn the basic skills, learn how to read a lot. Learn how to absorb information, learn how to write, learn how to think critically, and learn the basic tools. And once you do that, you'll be able to move from job to job. But I think that stability, I think that's going out the window. And even at the CBC, there's no guarantee that even if you start tomorrow, that you're going to be there 10 years from now, because the landscape is changing so rapidly. So that's why I think that a conversation like this, even for those who feel that, yeah, I'm pretty well settled where I am right now, always got to be thinking about this stuff.
And I think it's more precarious than you might think. Yeah, it feels pretty stable, but the CBC, your program gets canceled, you're doing something else, where are you going to land, and do you want to land in that other place? So one of my clients right now who just came to work with me is one of the people that was laid off from the Bell Cuts. 25 years in that particular world, in that particular job. They're 56 years old, and they never thought in a million years that things would change. But corporate interests are now more interested in streaming services and less about content for a news organization, and so that changed out from under this person. And this happens kind of regularly, unfortunately. And I would say that probably more than other areas, journalism is a bit more precarious. I think anybody who's thinking about that is maybe should really rethink that. There's literature out there that says every individual has 7 different jobs in their lifetime, in their career working lifetime. And I think that number is probably a little bit lower. Certainly Jen's been crashed that number a couple of times. What I'm just saying is that you have to plan for the uneventful, the things you cannot plan for, and be ready to be able to.
Yeah. Dave, I actually, just to end this part of the discussion on job security, I sometimes get questions from younger, racialized J school students, or, people who are not from, middle class or upper middle class means, being like, well, I really want to go into journalism. I saw what you wrote. Like, how did you do it? All that kind of thing. And sometimes I feel like telling them, you know what, it's actually tough, because if you need to take care of your parents, if you work a part-time job because you have other family obligations, then this might not be the best. This is a pretty high risk career in terms of job security. What would you say to someone like that?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I ask my, when I check in with my students and like after they've kind of left and they've graduated and they're in the business, and one of my first questions is, how are you paying the bills, right? Because we can have all these conversations we want, but if at the end of the day you can't pay your bills, then a lot of this stuff is for naught. So I think that one of the things that you really have to be, I think, good at, one of the skill sets that you have to develop for yourself, is to be entrepreneurial. You have to think about, how do I save money? How do I plan for the fact that I might not have a job for a number of months, or I might be out of a job for a number of months, or I might have family obligations that take me out of the workforce. And so you have to think about, well, what things do I have to do to build that kind of cushion? And I think that, traditionally journalists, they will tell you, and students tell you this, and it drives me crazy. Oh, I got into journalism because I suck at math. Well, no, you're just giving away the shop. You're just admitting to someone that you really don't know what you're doing if you can't follow money. So I would say that not only for racialized journalists, but for really, those for lower income communities, because I think that that's still a huge stumbling block for journalism schools, is not only attracting more racialized students, but attracting students from lower income communities. It still tends to be the top 1 or 2%, and I think that we've got to drill down deeper than that. But I would think, become more entrepreneurial, think about the finances in ways that you haven't before, and then try to develop a strategy where you can build a nest egg and build that kind of cushion for yourself.
Alex, just one more quick question that I thought of, but do you think that journalists entering the market are prepared mentally, and also financially, for the precarious nature of the industry? Because it can be incredibly stressful to always live knowing that you're just paycheck to paycheck. Or at least at the CBC, when I started, I was just a temp worker, and I just got assigned hours, and sometimes you just wouldn't know if next week you would have 40 hours of work.
Oh gosh, absolutely. The old expression of the CBC is there's a lot of work and no jobs. I think much like the conversation we've had up to this point, people get into this business because they care about it. People get into journalism because they're going to change the world, because they believe fundamentally in what that job does. And I certainly didn't think about financial security at the time. When I got into journalism, I was just thinking, hey, this is fantastic. I can't wait to write that big piece that's gonna do something big. I think that it's a bit of a function of age, potentially. As you begin to have kids, as you begin to have greater responsibilities, it becomes a little bit more of a need for stability. But I don't think people go into journalism thinking about the financial precarity or the employment precarity of it. And I think that that's also a generational thing too. I think that the latest, that the younger generations are recognizing some of what we've talked about, that this whole notion that you spend an entire career in one profession is unlikely to be part of the real paradigm.
Yeah. And to be fair, like my students, they are not necessarily under that impression that, oh yeah, I'm going to get a job at this. They want to work for, the CBC or CTV or Global or, the Globe or whoever. They would, I would say writ large, they want to be part of a larger media organization that allows them to do more interesting stuff. But I don't get the sense that they are under an illusion that, yeah, once I get this job, I'm going to be it for my lifetime. I think that they get it. They understand the precarious nature of work. They understand the layoffs. They understand the uncertainty. But they are willing to embrace it. And there's still there's still enough idealism on their part to, they believe that they can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. I am actually just going to take a couple of questions right now just to break up the flow of this. So we have a few questions coming in. One of the questions is from Frederick, who asks, how did panel members prepare for recent interviews, leaving senior positions to get to their jobs? Explain a bit about how you write yourself into jobs. Jen, do you want to take this?
Sure. So I take job interviews very seriously and have throughout my career. And I think a big part of that is working on air. I auditioned a lot. And you never just walk into an audition and wing it. You put a lot of time into what am I going to wear, if there's a script, practicing the script, doing research if it's going to be an interview. And I have brought that over to the prep that I do for any job or even a board opportunity or any important conversation. So usually I have an outline, I have key messages, I have a script, even if it's not word for word, but a journey that I hope to go on. And then I'll ask a friend who I often return the same favor to interview me so that I can have a run through. I think it's particularly important too, if you're doing it over Zoom, right, that you test it out on the platform. But that's the part I find a lot of people don't do. So even cover letters, if you take the time to write to the job, the person, the organization that you're applying for, that is going to set you apart. I mean, right now we're hiring for a position at the Walrus, and it's really eye-opening to see how many people don't mention on the cover letter. A lot of people don't even submit a cover letter, but on the cover letter, no mention on why they want to work at the Walrus. So if you can express why you want to work for a particular organization or why you're interested in that role and why you're the perfect person for that, if you can do that, well, you're already into the interview. And then in the interview, you want to just be yourself, right? And I think it's really hard to be yourself under pressure, but telling the stories of others helps you tell your own story. You just need some friends to coach you and give you feedback. And that's why we work with producers and editors. And
I'll just add to that a little bit.
Sure.
There's a couple of good places to do some research when you're getting ready for that. I think certainly when you're outside of journalism, companies have vision statements, mission statements, strategic plans, annual reports. They put a lot out there publicly about who they are and what they're about. That should guide a lot of what you do. To the extent you can learn about what the language of that organization is and use that, it is absolutely critical. It shows that you've invested the time to do that research, and it shows that you understand particularly that value piece. If you can take your cover letter and relate it to the values of that company and explain how you're part of that and how you live those values as well, that number one gives you a sense of whether you want to be applying for that company. And number two, it makes it so that you fit into what they're looking for. Because in every interview, there's going to be one person from HR who's got a bunch of boxes that says, did they read this? And do they know that? And do they know that? And the other most important part of the interview that a lot of people are testing is, and you shouldn't go in and recite your CV verbatim. What we're looking for in an interview, and I can say this having been a chief of staff and hired all sorts of former journalists in my career, is that what we're looking for in particular is, will you fit? Are you the sort of person we want to have in our organization? Because a journalist can always learn. And that's one of the things when we're hiring journalists, we know that journalists are going to be able to train up to where they're going. Part of the question is, are you the sort of person I want to be around? And to Jen's point, that's where a great cover letter can establish who you are. Have fun with that cover letter. Make sure you understand what your personality is about.
Okay, there's another really interesting question here. Irene asks, and not to anyone specific, so maybe you can all weigh in. Irene asks, I went into J school wanting to be a TV reporter because I love public speaking, being on screen, thinking under pressure and out in the world. However, the TV world seems precarious. What other jobs provide this sort of public life? I don't know, Jen, maybe you want to take this. You've done quite a lot of too.
My heart. I was a kid who grew up. I was president of my high school debating club. I did Model United Nations and elementary school competitive public speaking. So I was also attracted to TV reporting and hosting for that reason. I have found in leadership roles in general, and that's in corporate world, nonprofit, there are lots of opportunities for public speaking. We're doing it right now. So find your passion, figure out your expertise, lean into that, and there will be opportunities to talk about what you do to promote or sell your business. There's no shortage of those opportunities, I will find. Also, if you are a strong public speaker and to be a good talker and presenter, you have to keep working on it throughout your life. People will come to you and they will say, hey, I saw you here. Can you moderate this? And I think everyone, David, Alex, Vanmala, all of us have been approached because people do see you somewhere. So that's the part that has surprised me. A lot of people will say, do you miss being on air? I'm on air right now. I feel I'm on air all the time, just in a different way.
Yeah, I would add to that, when I talked about, taking stock of your skill sets. I mean, I started out as in radio and I ended my career at the CBC at TV. And then I did a lot of online stuff. And one of the things that, getting behind a microphone or in front of a camera provides you with, and when you're constantly monitoring your performance, which we do, and sometimes it's scary listening and scary, it's a scary process, but it gives you the confidence to speak in front of any audience. It gives you the confidence to present yourself. And I found that, during this pandemic, so many of these Zoom situations, it gives you the confidence to present yourself. So if anything, the fact that we can do things remotely and depend on our presentation skills helps in terms of marketing, helps in terms of job opportunities and so on. So I would say that I agree, Jen, that, that piece of it where, as a broadcaster, it gives you a tremendous advantage just to be able to participate, not only to participate, but to command a room if you have to.
And to build on this question, I'm going to take the second part of Irene's question. She's talking about how she's in financial journalism, just did the securities course, and is wondering if there's a place for business journalism in finance in that transition. And I would say, Irene, and to anybody else who's thinking about this, you've got to recognize that you bring some skills to the table that everybody else who's done that securities course doesn't have. I mean, if you have that basic knowledge set and you can match toe to toe with anybody else who's done that course, you can also bring to the table the ability, finance. If you can make finance understandable to clients, my God, you are a diamond in the rough. Your ability to do the public speaking, if ever there's a moment where your company is asked to present at a conference, is critical. Your ability to do research in the world of finance is unparalleled. So you have these skill sets, and I'm seeing more questions about how do you build that confidence. I mean, you have these skill sets, you have this training. This is incredibly marketable. You just need to look at it and recognize yourself for it. But to the question, yes, absolutely, a business journalist has a place in the world of finance.
Just to clarify, Irene had asked 2 questions in the chat, and her second question was around business journalism and transitioning out of business journalism into other fields. I will say, as a business journalist, one of the reasons why I think, I've been in this industry for 11 years and I have not had a problem finding a job is because it is a very specific skill set to be able to read balance sheets, to be able to understand numbers and also present them in a very kind of easy to digest way. So that kind of stuff is extremely transferable and valuable.
And you're great at it. I just want to give you a shout out. You're excellent at your work.
Oh, thank you, Jen. So I'll take one more question. We have about 10 to 12 minutes. So a question is around, I guess, mainstream media. Radio and TV are in trouble. How does the panel feel about podcasts, new popularity, or platforms like Twitch, which are now pushing sports talk shows? Where is the future of talent? Essentially, new forms of media. What are your thoughts on this? Anyone want to weigh in? Jen, maybe
sure,
you want to go first, and then we'll go around.
Happy to kick this off. While growing up, I always saw myself as a TV host, and even in my grade 8 yearbook, it said that I wanted to be a TV news anchor. Why I took my first job out of journalism school at Sony Music in their new media department is because it's about media, and this is where, I think of Marshall McLuhan and, the medium is the message, or the medium is the massage, as it was printed, is if you can tell a story and you're open to the opportunities in front of you right now, I think you're always going to be okay. So for example, a lot of us are on Clubhouse right now listening just to figure out, is this something that's going to take off? And why I was an early adopter on Twitter and many other platforms is because I see it as my job. I'm also a curious person. Journalists are always asking questions and studying new trends and trying to figure out what comes next. So podcasting is a great place to be. It's really exciting. I think for those of us who've done work in radio, our skill set really comes alive there. But it's not the same as radio. It is its own medium. I think it's a very vibrant time to be a storyteller because there are a lot of different options and platforms. It's also overwhelming. So I always like to encourage people, especially when I do social media workshops, is ask yourself, what story are you trying to tell and what's the best platform and space for it? Sure, it might be everywhere, but some stories are best on a podcast. Some stories are best in a print or digital story. Others, it might be a documentary. There's a lot of choice, and the barrier to entry has changed dramatically. I mean, Alex, David, think back to when we were trying to come up and the amount of money you would have to spend even to rent equipment. Mm-hmm. And now this new generation has that equipment, a lot of it on here.
That's right. Yeah.
I think part of and I agree 100%. I think what we're seeing is a very much more fractured market as well in terms of the ways you can broadcast. And I don't think, I know everybody wants to have that next amazing podcast. That there are hundreds of podcasts created every year. Trying to monetize podcasting is an increased challenge. You need to really have that unique place or that piece of the market to really be able to make that a profession. I think what we're seeing is broadcasting in a very splintered environment, but I think the ability. So I'm always looking for in a variety of roles for people who can leverage social media in a variety of different ways. But I don't think one person is going to make a living on podcasting alone right now. And I think that you need to be able to think about your ability to communicate as your transferable skill, but that you have a whole lot of different options that you can leverage. And it's pretty exciting. I agree. And I do think that there's a future for radio. There's a question here about what's the future of traditional radio in leveraging the digital aspects of how to get those stories out there. But I also think that there's a life for radio. I remember when Jen and you and I were at Concordia, and I think it was Ross Perigo was talking about radio could be on its way out. It's not on its way out. There's still a need to have free communication transfer. In one of the most beautiful things about radio is its immediacy. So I do think that there will still be a place. The problem is it's just not terribly profitable. And convincing people to pay for airtime on a radio station is a challenge. But I do think there will always be a demand, and I do think there will always be a need for good local news and information. So
there was a reason why at the CBC they still call the radio the senior service, and that is because just a lot of people listen to radio. I would say that with multimedia platforms like ours, like National Observer, we are looking to get into podcasts. So one of the advantages that you have, or even if you're a magazine like the Walrus, for example, who says that you have to give a story a 4,000 or 3,000 word treatment? Why not do a podcast? And I think that those are the kinds of questions that we're asking ourselves. I'm working with contributors right now, and my question to them more and more is, okay, what format are we looking at? Is it a traditional? Is it mainly video? Is it video that we're going to set up with an intro? Is it a podcast? It is, can we produce this? Can we get some production into this? And those are the questions that I have for my students in my investigative workshop at King's right now. So I think that it doesn't only have to be a podcast, but the podcast can be a treatment in, now we are in a multimedia universe.
Mm-hmm. We have about 5 minutes left, and I do want to get to these two questions because I quite like them. How can you build confidence that you can work outside journalism and do the job that's expected in those areas? I think this is a really good question because often it's quite easy to get into a comfort zone in whatever job that you're in, and the idea of breaking out of it can seem a little bit intimidating. So, anyone wants to, maybe Dave, do you want to weigh in on this?
I would circle back to what we've been, one of the sub themes of this conversation for the last, hour is that, your strengths can take you beyond what is traditionally thought of as the world of journalism, right? If you can tell stories, if you can write, if you can research, if you can communicate, if you can do that with confidence, if you can absorb, if you could descend into a subculture, whatever it is, the world of finance. I'm teaching my students how to read financial statements right now. If you can descend into that world, pull out the basics, distill it, and then tell a story, you're going to find work. Maybe not in traditional journalism, if that's not what you want, but you'll find work in many endeavors. So I would say that really think about the skill sets in as broad a terms as possible.
And
Okay.
And I would say build your network outside of sources. So journalists spend a lot of time getting sources, building relationships as it relates to their beat and what they're covering. And that's really important. But when you think about your career opportunities, it usually does come back to people in your network, and not your closest friends, but people you've met along on the way. And I don't think journalists spend enough time on LinkedIn or speaking to their non-journalist friends, because if you're just connected with friends who are journalists, they're going to go, I don't know. I don't know if you should do it. Sounds scary. Whereas if you talk to someone who works in communications or someone who has a startup, they might say, let me connect you with this person, or yeah, I think you could do it. There's this opportunity. So really expand your networks. In journalism, we spend so much time on the story, but you have to treat yourself like your story.
Yeah.
Okay. Just one question, and Alex, you can take it. Karen, she asked this quite a while ago. She says, ageism is a concern. What do you say to people who want to leave but are fearful of being rejected in favor of younger people? Alex, maybe you can take this.
So just to, based on the last question, and this goes to what we're talking about now in terms of, no matter what age you are, the first step to rethinking who you are and how you're valuable is by rewriting your CV. And rewriting it in a fashion that says, here are the skills that I have. And so I think that applies across the board. And that's the first thing I do with any one of my clients, is sit down and just say, rewrite it, relook at it, and recognize what you're good at. Ageism is a challenge across the board. I don't want to sugarcoat that. That's inevitably a challenge. But again, as companies today are recognizing that skill sets and a variety of different skill sets are important. We are, as people who are hiring, are always looking for people who bring a variety of different things to the table. And one of the things that we plan on is generally, depending on the corporation, a 5 to a 10-year horizon in terms of any career that's going to stay with you. And so I think that age is less and less important. As I say, a couple of my clients right now are in their 50s, and they've been forced out because of the bell cuts. But what I'm also finding is that when I'm working with them to approach employers in a variety of different areas, that the employers aren't hesitating to say, yeah, I really want to consider this person. And I know one that's having some real success right now. So I think that the challenges that face people with ageism are there, but I think that they're not insurmountable. And we do live in a society where, you know, the bubble in terms of the workforce is in that upper age demographic right now, and people are still looking to hire people like that.
And I think that people in their latter ages actually can bring more to the table in terms of, well, you want someone for a year or 2 years, I can bring you that experience. I'm not necessarily looking to be an employee for the next 20 years, right? And I think that you can actually use that experience to your advantage.
People are looking to build teams of multiple skill sets, and that's part of it.
Yeah. Well, we could go on and on, but it's 1 o'clock, and I think we've had a really, really fruitful discussion. I am going to hand it back to George for a few closing remarks, but thank you all for attending. I hope you really learned a lot from our 3 very great panelists.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Vanmala and Jen and Alice and David, for your thoughtful and entertaining discussion. So good to hear that there's life after journalism after all. In fact, I saw a chat from Karen Tanger. There is a support group on Facebook, Life After Journalism Canada. Check that one out as well if you're interested. A reminder that this webinar will be available for view on our website shortly, rtdnacanada.com, and of course on our RTDNA YouTube channel. And please stay tuned for announcements of upcoming webinars and our annual convention, which is scheduled for early June. Yes, it will be virtual because of the ongoing pandemic, but we hope to have all of you sign up and be part of our annual convention. And don't forget our annual awards as well, where winner will be announced in the late spring. And we need some judges, so please sign up to be a judge. If you want more information on that, please email us at info@rtdnacanada.com. On behalf of the RTDNA Canada, please take care and be safe. Thank you.